Okay, so today I have invited a small group of people who confess to having stash. And in our knitting community, stash has taken on the connotation of almost being like a dirty word. It's almost taboo to even talk about it. But these brave souls have agreed to come together. I want this to be a place that's non-judgmental and a safe environment to talk about various issues pertaining to stash. So I have a long list of questions, but everyone's mic is open, and I'll throw out a couple of quotes, and then I just want it to be an open dialogue. Having said that, I hope that this will be a conversation that continues into the future. I'm thinking it maybe once a month. So if you're watching this and you would like to be part of the conversation, please find a way to private message me either on Ravelry or Instagram. I'm at billietoy, and that will be in the show notes for you to find me. So let me know. It doesn't mean you have to love stash or hate stash. It just means you have to be willing to talk about what drives you, and maybe we can all come together and figure out a way to make our yarn collections work for us. So, there's this joke that goes around about sable stash acquisition beyond life expectancy. I'm not going to ask anyone here if they're in that category, and I will never ask you to tell us the value of your stash. But I am just curious, yes or no, do you know the value of what's in your stash? Okay, Michelle's shaking her head no. Does anybody know the number? I don't want to know the number.
I don't even know how much I've got.
You mean the weight or the number of balls we have? No.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of the dollar value.
No.
Because I met a woman who told me in no uncertain terms that she knew she had over $20,000 tied up in inventory. Inventory, I'm calling it. I mean, because you could probably open a yarn shop. So I missed that. Does anyone, yes, know the dollar value or pounds or, whatever currency? No. Okay. I don't either, but just wondering if anybody does. That's how cavalier we seem to be about it. So let me read you this quote from Ema22 of Brooklyn. I find myself with the opportunity to buy yarn on sale or closeouts, either in the LYS or more commonly at the web. I'm at a loss trying to figure out how much yarn to buy when I don't have a specific project in mind, but find myself faced with a wonderful yarn I want to make something with, especially if it's at a great price. Anybody want to comment on that? I mean, is that how you feel? Like you get these emails in your inbox from all these companies that you've signed up to their newsletters, and they're like, today only 35% off and it's your favorite yarn. Like, how does it make you feel to hear something like that?
I'm not tempted actually, because I've already got lots of yarn, and the only time I'd really be kind of, sort of guided by that is if I had a specific project that I had to knit for my husband, because obviously my yarn stash is mostly sort of yarn, like I'll buy packs which are like 500 grams, which would be for a project for me. For a man, you need double that or even more. So
you're only buying when you have a project in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that is not typical, but I'd love to hear from the others.
I buy in response to these ads. I love a good price, and I see a yarn that's wool and silk, and I think, I've got to have that. Unfortunately, I seem to never buy enough.
Meaning you buy one ball because it's pretty and it's not enough to make a sweater?
Usually I buy like 5 or 6, 7 or 8, and then I have to really hunt to find a pattern that fits within the yardage parameters.
Okay, so the cart is coming before the horse.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, do I regret that? No.
Looking at fair old projects though, with that stash, depending what weight it is it like what weight would it be? That is it 4-ply or?
I like DK weight.
Right.
Well, I mean, that there's always going to be questions, more questions, more questions. Like, is your stash all one weight? But I want to stay on the topic of when a good deal is presented to you, does it tempt you and do you cave in?
Well, you know, I saw a yarn at one of these knitting conventions more than 20 years ago when I was knitting a lot, and I loved it. And I've been following the vendor over the 23 years since that knitting convention. And now she's not producing the yarn anymore. And I'm thinking, damn, I should have bought that yarn when I saw it.
Well, that is the risk, isn't it? And it's a tough call. How do you know when you should, when you shouldn't? You never know when someone's going to be stopping a color or
Right.
discontinuing their whole business. Yeah. Well, I'd like to hear from the others.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not really a sales kind of person, even with clothes or anything. I don't get that excited. I tend to impulse buy when I'm at like an event or in a yarn shop and I see stuff, and I don't necessarily, and I don't have any problem buying stuff without any project in mind.
Well, when you say impulse buy, why is it restricted to in person or in a yarn shop when the internet is there 24/7? That doesn't, like, not the same impulse, it's a different shopping experience.
Yeah, I think because I like to see it and feel it in person. So unless I tend to only buy stuff online when I actually have a specific project in mind, because since I'm a sweater knitter, I usually need a lot of balls. So, and I know I'm looking for something specific. That tends to be when I buy stuff online. Whereas I can wantonly buy stuff without any projects in mind if I'm actually feeling it, seeing it, and touching it. But sales and buying online tend to be when I have a very specific project in line and I'm looking for a specific kind of yarn and a certain amount. So that's kind of
Okay, all of you so far are like so level-headed. I do not believe that this is typical of our community. So if you are watching this and you have a different perspective, please reach out to me, because I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but I know that there are a lot of people out there who are really struggling with the cons. So far, you all kind of have it well in check.
Actually, I do have a confession. Billie, do you remember that yarn that I had a project, a red, white, and blue, and I'd run out of that blue, and it took ages for me to find the actual yarn. I didn't know what shade it was. It was King Cole Merino. And it took me ages and I was buying other yarn that I thought was that shade, because I didn't keep the comb, so I didn't remember what shade it was. So I ended up buying different yarn thinking that might be the same. But obviously when you look online, the colours are different to what they might be in real life. So anyway, so I did find that yarn. Someone was selling it on eBay.
Which is always a miracle when that happens.
But anyway, well, listen to this. So the confession is, a couple of days ago, someone else was selling the same colour comb, and it was quite a good price. And because I loved that colour, I bought it. Even though I didn't need it, I just thought that colour is lovely. I need to buy it, and it was a good price. So there you go. But my confession is I don't always have it under control. It's because I think it's going back, the psychological aspect was because I couldn't find the yarn that time. It was kind of, reaction was, oh, I could have more of that for a good price.
Like I couldn't find it that one time, so
and now
I'm
it's
never
in
going to be able to
abundance.
find it.
Exactly. So there's a psychology behind that.
Our mind plays all kinds of tricks with us, but it can be costly.
Yes. When I was younger, you know, I certainly would buy yarns that were being discounted because that's what I could afford. But now that my stash is pretty big and I have so much, I'm trying very hard not to buy anything. But I will. Like I was in Scotland this spring, and so I had to bring back a yarn from Scotland, or well, it was more than one ball of yarn, but I had to bring back something for a project. But I certainly did not need more yarn. If all yarn is equal, but it's not, because it's like fabric, right? It's like when you're quilting, you start using this yarn, or you're using this fabric, but you can't pair certain yarns with other yarns, and maybe even that's beyond doubling them or splitting them. You still can't pair them just because of the content or because of the coloring or whatnot.
I think everyone has their own strategy and their own limitations. And to me, the goal is to figure out where you are on that spectrum. So Helen, it sounds like you have it figured out. And frankly, I kind of share in that same mentality of when I'm somewhere out of the country and there are yarns that are different from what I normally would buy, instead of buying some letter opener as a souvenir of my trip or some other little doodad trinket that's going to collect dust, I'm inclined, it sounds like you, to buy yarn to bring back as a souvenir, because then I have maybe a longer lasting memento of my trip. So
yes,
I think that's a nice kind of stash acquisition rule to live by, but I shouldn't be judging.
Yeah. I mean, other than that, it's a case of if I'm making something for somebody and they want charisma gray, this specific gray, then of course I'm going to order it online because I'm out of a charisma.
I was kind of wondering, for the people who have gigantic stashes, if they ever fall into the trap of accidentally purchasing something that they already had, but didn't know they had. No, it's never happened to anyone. Okay, you guys don't have a big enough stash. I bet that there are people out there in stash land who have done that. Let me hear from you, please.
I
You have,
recently bought a ball of pink yarn for a pair of socks, and then I realized after I got home that I had a pinkish ball of yarn that was sock weight that I could have used.
Okay, so there you go. I mean, that's similar to what I was asking. Denise, you wanted to say something?
oh yeah, you haven't talked about your stash.
Oh,
You
me.
have one?
Mine is nominal. And because I figured that this conversation will go on in months to come, I thought I don't want to show my hand in the very first conversation, but at some point in the future, I will pull out my stash and I can show it on this screen.
Oh, wow.
I won't be pulling mine out and showing it.
No, and I wouldn't ask anyone else to, I certainly wouldn't ask anyone else to do that. But Yeah, like those of us who live in tiny Manhattan apartments, I've spoken about this in some of my previous podcasts. You don't have the space. But for me, it's also a question of, is that how I want to allocate my limited resources to have it tied up? Well, I'm really glad that Carol joined us. I was hoping that she wasn't going to be a no-show because she is in a very different camp than some other people on the call. Welcome, Carol. As soon as you can figure out how to come off of mute, I can't wait to hear your voice. I think Carol's in New Hampshire. Is that right? You could shake your head yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Hi.
sorry, I was eating lunch and I reading and lost track of time.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh,
That's
did you go to your meeting? And I'm like, oh, darn.
well, so Carol is someone who I have never met, and I happened to find her on Ravelry. I really wasn't like stalking Ravelry people a lot, but she just had a little comment in her page on Ravelry, her profile page, that said, "None of my stash is for sale. Don't ask, because I am not going to have stash beyond my life expectancy. Don't worry about me." Now, Carol, I think everyone else on the call knits, but you're a crocheter, right?
For the most part, I'm a crocheter. I can knit like a dish towel. There's no guarantee it will be rectangular.
So I only crochet a very little bit. I really don't have a handle, and I don't know if you will either. I know people talk about crocheting eats up a lot more yarn than knitting. Does anybody know the statistics on that? Is it like 100% more? Is it 50% more?
I don't even know if it's true.
I-
To tell you the truth, it is the story that's told, but I don't know if it's true because, you know, a lot of things depend on what size hook you're using, what size needle you're using. If you're using a 12mm hook versus a 2mm hook, one of them is going to use more yarn.
Do you have a particular weight of yarn that you typically use?
I don't use a lot of really fine yarns unless they're multi-stranded, just because I got eyesight issues and
So
I'm
worsted
old.
weight, maybe?
I use some worsted weight. I use a lot of DK weight. I do a lot of plying. A big chunk of my stash is made up of coned weaving yarns, because when I bought them, I didn't really know how much, first of all, how thin they were, and second of all, how many yards there were on a cone. And so that's actually my goal right now, is to get all of that cone yarn out, because we want to move, and cones are heavy. They don't take up much room, but they weigh a lot. I mean, you can have like 15 skeins of red heart and it's equal to one weight of cone.
Because I was gonna try and ask you, like, if you ever crocheted a sweater, and then we could make a comparison to someone here who has knit a sweater in the same weight yarn, and then we'd be able to know, like, is it true or isn't it? Somehow we have to find out. Maybe
Like I
somebody
say, I
could
think
like,
it really depends on what you're using and what you're making. And I'm working on a hoodie it's a light worsted, it's a Barocco vintage yarn for my grandson, but that's really the first sweater I've worked on, and it's for a kid.
well, it
I
would
may
be
have made-
interesting to know how many yards that eats up, and then we could certainly make a comparison to a comparable size sweater that was knit. And then, you know, we would know once and for all if it's.
Well, like I say, I
really true.
honestly think it depends on what size needles you're using.
Ask ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, I am using it with regularity now, but you know, caveat emptor, you really have to know your stuff. You can't, at this time at least, I mean, maybe in the future it will be more reliable, but there was an article in the New York Times about a lawyer who presented his case that he had ChatGPT help him prepare, and it cited other lawsuits that were fictitious. So the judge was very upset with him. You can't completely put all your trust yet in ChatGPT. So if it said, oh yes, crochet requires more yarn, I don't know that I'm ready to just make them the final word, but you know, we could figure that out. Anyway,
I just sent you a link, Billie, because Interweave just did an experiment to see if it's true or not. And so if you read that link, it will tell you all that information and what they did.
Thank you. It's a little hard for me to multitask. I saw the link come up in the chat. When I put this episode up on YouTube, I will grab that link and I'll put it in the show notes so everybody will be able to go and read that article. Thank you, Helen. I'm sure that's interesting. Okay, so let's get back to talking about, you know, we started on this topic of when we buy yarn. Some of us buy yarn when we're on holiday. Under what circumstances are you typically buying yarn?
I'm actually not most of the time. My stash is enormous. And a lot of it has plans associated with it. And I'm changed, like I bought yarn to make my grandson's hoodie because I wanted something better quality than just acrylic. I bought a couple of skeins of worsted weight in a specific color that I needed for a project I'm working on. But really, for the most part, unless something's really like grabbing me, I'm not going to the store and buying yarn. But that's because I have like half my house is full of yarn, and it's a very big house. The other half is full of books. That's pretty much all we do.
And we haven't heard from you. Under what circumstances are you buying yarn?
Sorry, was that Fran?
Yes.
Under what circumstances? I think I'm somebody who I just buy what I like.
But when? Like what motivates you to do that shopping experience?
Well, I mean, I've just come back from 4 weeks in the UK and I have done my bit for the British economy and have a disgusting amount. Actually, for the first time I'm disgusted with myself for how much yarn that I bought. A lot of it was souvenir shopping. A big chunk of what I bought was I did a knitting tour for the first 2 weeks and was really lucky enough to go up to Susan Crawford's the studio that she has. And I love her. You know, she's such an important person in particularly the last 15 years of my life. And I'd never bought yarns from her, so I kind of really did lose my mind in her studio. I think on the trip I was kind of buying, because I need a lot of vintage stuff. I like the 4-ply or the fingering weight. I still don't understand American weight yarns. I'm just trying to understand them, but I tend to buy the finer weights. But when I was traveling, because we were on a knitting trip, we were kind of going and visiting other farms and seeing breeds. So I would buy, you know, there's a couple of skeins of yarn that I bought that was specific to this breed of sheep up in the north of England. But I think for me, generally, a lot of my socializing is around knitting. And so, you know, I will go to events with people. We do here in New York, we do a lot of events where we will have brunch and then go to a yarn store. There's a lot of knitting events. Rhinebeck is a huge thing for me as well. I tend to really lose my mind at Rhinebeck. So I don't know that there are specific circumstances. I think for me, it's just if it's really beautiful and I love it, and I'm lucky enough to be able to afford a lot of that stuff.
Well, those are specific circumstances. When there's a major event, when you're traveling, it's not like you woke up on a Saturday morning and went online to see like, okay, who's got a good sale going on?
No.
Because it was in your inbox.
Yeah.
So you're waiting for some kind of event to happen.
Not necessarily. I think I'm like Amy. I've made the mistake online of thinking I was buying a specific color and then it turning up in real life and it's not the color. So I tend not to buy online anymore unless I actually know what the yarn is. I like in-person events and, you know, shopping with my friends. But one of the big drivers for me, and I think it's maybe just how I justify it, I'm a pretty cranky feminist. And I'm very pro-women. And one of the big justifications for me is that I reckon there's probably about 99% of the yarn business is run and owned by women. And so I think I'm happy to spend the money because I know that I'm supporting small women-owned business. And that is a huge, in fact, that's probably one of the biggest drivers for me in buying the despicably large stash that I have. So, yeah.
Well, that is a very unexpected take on things. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. I mean, that's why I think this is such a fun, interesting thing to do, because you never know, like, you know, what perspectives people have. Certainly, we're concerned, many of us, with slow fashion, which is why we knit or crochet in the first place. But how does that mesh with overconsumption of yarn? And what is that doing to our environment? I mean, there are other social issues besides female producers and dyers, which I think it's very noble of you, certainly. Now I feel bad that I bought yarn from John Arbon. But now his company, he sold it to 2 young women. So, well, let's see. Does anybody keep track of their stash? Like, is anybody using, well, we know Carol is because I saw it, using Ravelry or some other method for logging in, you know, I have 1,700 yards of this, or, you know, 5 balls of that.
I did once.
Just once.
Before the stash got out of control, I actually had it all out of my wall shelf, and I was making, like, and had an A to Z, so going by different colours and different dye lots. I was actually logging it all in a book, but then I stopped updating it. And then when it got out of control, the buying of yarn, and it was here, there and everywhere, it wasn't all at home. I've got some in storage. That went out the window. I've still got the book, but it's out of date because I probably used some of that yarn and I didn't update the book. So in theory, it was a good idea at the time, but it's keeping to that, isn't it? If you don't keep up to date, and I think that proves once your stash gets out of control, these, you know, things, it's just time consuming. And I think when we're so busy, I haven't got the time to, I don't even go on Ravelry very much, I must admit, because I just don't have time. I work full time, 5 days a week. You know, I knit in my lunch hour. I knit on the train if I'm lucky to have the space, or I knit of an evening. So I'm not, you know, I'm just a hobby knitter. But the obsession is I can't have enough stash. But then one day I might not be able to afford to buy yarn, so I don't have to buy it because I've already got loads. So I think it's a psychological thing. One day I might not have the money to buy it, but don't worry, I've already got a huge stash. I'll just knit that up.
Does anyone else feel like that? I certainly don't feel like that.
At one point in my life, I actually did not have enough money to buy yarn, and my stash, it was a really hard time in a lot of ways, and my stash saved my life. I was working 2 jobs. I was crocheting all the time, but I had the yarn to do it. I didn't have to worry about, we didn't have the money to buy yarn. Because when we did have the money to buy yarn, I stashed up big time.
Yeah. It's true. And it could be the same for a lot of people. It's that, what's the word? It's, I don't know, it is an insecurity, definitely, because I've been in 2 jobs where, I mean, I've been made redundant twice in my time. And there's always at the back of my head, what if that happens to me again? And I haven't got the money to go out buying the yarn. I've already got it. While I had the money, I bought it.
Mhm.
And I think that is how my mind works. It's the same with everything I collect. Scarves, junk jewelry, like costume jewelry, vintage clothes. I mean, I've got so many. I've got a lot of it in storage. I've just literally brought my summer clothes home from storage yesterday and put
Most people wouldn't,
in.
most people wouldn't inventory their jewelry because it's one of these, one of these, one of
Yeah.
these.
Oh no, I mean, I've got
But your yarn stash, you might want to inventory for a variety of reasons. You might want to know the value of it. You might want to know what you have on hand. So if you're looking for a project, you might match it up to what you already have. And
when
like,
it's not all in the same place. I've got some yarn in storage in boxes.
well, that's why it would be good to have a listing of what you
I
have
forget what's there. That's
and
the
where
thing,
it's
yeah.
and where it's located. So
I know where it is, but it's getting to it.
I
I
will
guess
say,
it
I'm
really
sorry.
depends on how much you have. You know, if you've got shelves and shelves and shelves, which I see, I mean, there are other knitting podcasters, and behind them, they always have these cubbies that are stocked full with like sweaters quantity, this yarn, that yarn. They might have 50 sweaters quantities of yarn. And to me, some of it looks very similar to a lot of the rest of it. I don't know how somebody would even approach having that kind of stash without knowing, well, I already have pink mohair and yellow mohair, so that they don't buy more of same.
I think you're sounding like a project manager. An engineer.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's it. Sorry,
But I think
true confessions, that was my background.
I probably
It is
should.
quite expensive to buy yarn, isn't it, these days? So I bought lots of vintage yarn on eBay a few years ago, and I just stashed it up. I just kept buying it and buying it, and then but I look on there now and it's really expensive. It's a lot more expensive than when I bought it. So I'm glad
you bought it as an investment.
Well, at the time, I didn't think that. I just thought, oh, I want to knit vintage style sweaters. Oh, isn't it good to buy vintage yarn? Because it was just more authentic. But at the time, I didn't think of it as an investment, not at all.
But it turned out to be a good investment if it's something that you paid £2 for and now it's worth £10.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was that cheap, but it's still quite cheap. I mean, it is oddments, though. That's the thing. So it's only kind of, some of it is only enough to knit a ferrule with, you know, but that's where it comes in handy, knitting ferrule, because you can use up the odd, you know, like the odd 50 grams here and there on a ferrule.
Does anybody have a budget for how much they are willing to spend every month or every year? Anybody budgeting their money for yarn expenditures? No? There's this French woman who podcasts, I don't know her name, but she was saying on her show that she was really trying to go on a no-buy regimen. And I think she made it through like the first 5 months of the year or so without buying anything. And then when she finally did buy, she felt like, well, if I spread that out over the last few months, it really wasn't that much per month. So she kind of rationalized and justified it. I do wonder if there are people who have a specific budget that they won't let themselves spend more than $100 a month, or, you know, I remember in the days when I used to go to Atlantic City to gamble, I would say, like, you know, I'm going to take X number of dollars, and if I lose all of it, which can happen, I won't beat myself up because that's my allotment, that's my entertainment money. And then I never felt bad or guilty. And I think there's got to be a lot of guilt and a lot of self-loathing over overspending, spending more maybe than what you can actually afford. So, this group, you're not those people, but those
Well,
people
no.
are out there.
Absolutely, I think all of us have a certain set point where we would just say, okay, we're not gonna spend that. I mean, yarns can be, you can buy it at a dollar store for $1 a ball, which would be like probably about 50 cents in the UK. But yet you can also buy yarn that is like $100 a ball or even more. And so I think that we all have our price point where we eventually say, you know what, this is too rich for me.
Does anyone belong to a yarn club where, you've already committed that you're going to take their yarn and you're set up for like a monthly fee? Has anyone ever done it? Because I know
No.
it's a very popular thing. No,
It is.
no.
Somebody said yes. Who was it?
No, I said it was a popular thing.
Oh,
She said, yes, it's a popular thing, and yet none of us, none of the 7 of us have ever done it. I personally don't want somebody to decide for me what they feel like sending me, but
Yeah.
evidently there are people who trust that it's going to be something that they would not otherwise see. I don't
do you
know.
know anybody who's been in a yarn club? Have you seen what they've gotten?
Yes. I can't say like, oh, they showed this specific thing, but yeah, there are people online who have shown like what's coming in their box. And if this month the color is orange and you don't like orange, I don't know what people do. Maybe people are trading it. Has anyone traded any of their yarn, like using Ravelry or?
Not using, I have a girlfriend that we sometimes trade off, she'll say, do you have any of this? Or I'll say, do you have any of that? She's getting rid of some yarn in the near term that's yarn that I may like, and I said, I'll pay you for it. But basically, yeah, no, that's one of the reasons I put up that sign is I had people saying, well, you have so much, can you give me some? And it was like, I don't know you from a hole in the wall. No.
Give. No.
I routinely, there's a couple people who we trade, and we don't worry about the price that anyone spent for the ball. We just trade gram for gram. And so sometimes it means that in exchange for something rather that, like, so with my mom, for example, sometimes we were passing back and forth this really ugly ball of yarn while we were also getting a nice ball of, whoever was getting the nice ball of yarn, and the person who was giving away the nice ball of yarn got this ugly ball of yarn, and it went back and forth quite a bit. But it allowed us to in certain weights use up what we had without going out and buying base colors.
Am I the only one who has my stash on Ravelry?
No.
I mean, it needs to be updated, but
I have my stash there.
I don't have pictures.
I have part of my stash there in pictures. It's like a choice between, do I put my stash on Ravelry or do I spend time knitting or crocheting? And I usually choose to spend time knitting and crocheting.
Well, that's what I did. I had joined a group that said you can't participate unless you put all your stash on. That was back, I don't know, probably 2010, 2012, that ballpark. And so that's how, like I say, right now it needs to be updated. I try to mark that I used stash, but I'm pretty sure I gave away, I don't know, 24 cones of rayon chenille when I realized there was no way to work with it. And I gave it to an art teacher who was thrilled. But that's something, even if you just do it bits by bits, like, oh, I'll do this cabinet today and I'll do You know, next month I'll do that cabinet or whatever. It really makes a difference of being aware of how much you have accumulated, as well as how fast you're using it.
I still have a zillion questions. We haven't even scraped the surface, but I don't want this to go on endlessly. So I'm going to invite you all to come back, and anybody watching this, again, shoot me a private message on Ravelry or Instagram at billietoy. I'd love to have more people who really have vast stashes that they feel they don't want to have, that, you know, they're in over their heads and they're looking for a way out. Because I think that there are a lot of people out there who are in that camp, but it's very delicate. People aren't willing to admit that they have a problem. So, and a lot of people don't see it as a problem, but you know, whatever your situation is, you know, I'm really looking for that mix of people so that all opinions, all approaches can be put out on the table. And maybe somebody comes up with some solution to your problem that's not a solution to anybody else's problem. And, you know, I hope that people will have like little takeaways. So before we leave, I wanted to ask like one wrap up question. If somebody was a brand new knitter and they came to you and said, you know, I see all this great stuff out there, I'm afraid of overdoing it. What one tip can you give me about not swimming in too much yarn? What advice would you give? I'm going to ask each one of you to please give one suggestion for that newbie knitter who has not acquired their first ball of yarn yet, but they're going to become someone who's knitting on a regular basis.
Okay, I'll go first. I would say find a project that's small, that can be finished with one skein of yarn, and see if you buy the skein of yarn to fit the project, see if you like it. Finish
And
it.
don't be tempted to buy anything else.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, did I do that? No.
I would say, remember that newer yarn is always around the corner, and there's always innovations in the yarns and new techniques. And so if you stay low, you can go with all that new stuff and have a lot of fun.
Good advice.
Thank you. Amy?
I don't know if I don't know, because to me I think some of it's a personality thing. So I don't know. I have problems coming up with something because some people are a monogamous knitter and knits one project at a time, and some people like to have a few things going. So I don't know.
So would you say to that newbie knitter, just that, like, if you're going to knit one project at a time, you might consider doing this, but after you start to knit and you feel like you might want to start another thing, then you might consider buying that too? I mean, would anybody say like, oh, just, you know, buy out the whole shop? No,
Right,
no. I mean, there's some limit.
right.
Like what, you know, what are we going to advise? Like if I had a daughter, a 20-something daughter who was going to start knitting, like what would I want to tell her? I mean, that's what I'm trying to like pull out of you. If it's somebody you care about and you don't want to see them
Yeah.
spend more than they're earning to
Yeah,
stock their closet full of yarn.
Yeah, I guess if you put it that way, I would say maybe buy some yarn that you really like the color or the feel. Don't think about necessarily the price until you decide whether it's something that you want to continue with.
So before you buy the sweaters quantity, buy enough to knit your swatch?
Yeah.
Because once you like invest in that sweaters quantity, like, oops, now if you don't like it,
Like it, yeah.
okay.
I mean, I would probably share when I started knitting again. Well, actually, when I first started knitting in the 80s, I started, my first project was a bolero cardigan, like a 50s one, and it was in like, I think it was in a double knit, or it could have even been thicker than that. So I would give that example, like just start with one project and buy enough yarn for that. I mean, are we talking about someone that, you know, has practiced and is ready to start their knitting projects, or are you telling like someone that's literally not knitted before?
No, I think somebody who's in a yarn shop buying yarn and they're just a beginning knitter. I think that we would all want to spare them from buying out the shop and now having their money tied up in something that they won't be able to knit in the foreseeable future. And then they have this pile of wool or whatever sitting there that, you know, maybe they could use that money to go out on a Saturday night.
A lot of people knit socks, don't they? I've never knitted socks, but
I've never knit socks either.
But that wouldn't take up a lot of yarn, wouldn't it? That would be a good thing if you were, you know, confident enough to knit socks. Then that would
And
be
socks.
good.
Socks take a fair bit of time to knit too, so they're a great project because you carry them around. And
yeah, so that would be a good beginner's project, I think.
Wow. I would not recommend that to anyone. Isn't that interesting? I'm
Well, I've never
intimidated.
knitted socks, but I must admit, I think you have to be fairly experienced, don't you, to knit
I'm
socks?
I
intimidated
would
by
say so.
socks.
What
If
about a
someone is-
scarf then? Scarf
someone is
or a
brand
cushion?
new.
A cushion
someone
would
is-
be good.
Someone is brand new, I would say like a dishcloth.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm more concerned about the stash acquisition aspect of it. Not so much what they're going to knit, what project you're recommending, but they're in a yarn shop, they're buying yarn for their first project, and the temptation is all around. Every yarn they look at is like the most gorgeous fluff, and they want it all. And like, I want to be like, oh, honey, wait. You know, that it seems like, you know,
What's
we
the
all kind of,
downside?
sorry. Denise, I'm sorry, I was not.
Oh, I was going to say that, what's the downside? So the new knitter goes in, buys a couple $100 worth of very nice wool. And I would say that they would probably be more likely to commit to the practice of knitting with the investment and with the nicer feel and the nicer product.
Okay, let's chalk one up in that column. Bye, bye, bye.
It does depend if they've got the money to do that, though. I mean,
Right.
if it's someone that had to like was on a budget, then you know maybe you do start with acrylic. You know, if you're not confident enough to start spending real money, because it can be very expensive, like buying pure wool, and especially, I mean, I don't buy the hand dyed yarns. You know, I know a lot of people do, but for vintage knitwear, like you know, from the vintage patterns, most of my colours are just block pattern, you know, block colours, not the, you know, heathered or multicoloured. It doesn't suit, you know, the actual patterns. So obviously the tweed does, so I buy tweed, but and some of the slightly heathered. I have got some heathered sort of that I've bought on eBay from people that do, hand dyed. There's a certain person I've bought on there before. I've got some beautiful yarn, but I don't know what to do with it yet. The same old thing. What do I do with this yarn?
Okay, well, I think this is a good place to leave it for our very first gathering. I hope that you'll come back again. Put July 9th on your calendars. It's another Sunday. And if you know other people who you think would like to be part of this conversation, I always feel the more the merrier. So I wanted to thank each one of you for taking the chance and coming and exposing your hands a little bit today. And I hope to see you again.
Can I just say one thing before we go?
Sure.
I had heard once that, so some people are saying, well, you must be a hoarder because you've got a bag full of yarn, a bag. And, but the definition of a hoarder if you're going through your stash and if you're actively sorting through it and using it, then apparently that does not qualify you as a hoarder. So if that helps make anyone feel a little bit better as we end the call, if you're flipping your stash and going through it, then you're not a hoarder.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen.
So, can I just ask a question? Because I kind of feel like I'm the odd one out here. Does anyone here feel bad about their stash? Honestly?
No,
No one on this call.
yeah.
I
No,
don't know anyone
but
that does feel bad
Really?
about their stash. We kind of joke, and I've got one friend in particular that if I need to kind of curtail my budget, I will say to her, I'm only allowed to buy stuff that I absolutely, absolutely love. And she is really good at holding me to that. But I don't know. And I meet a lot of knitters. I mean, Billie, I know you through the meetup group that I organise for in New York. I know a lot of knitters. I see a lot of knitters come through. I have yet to meet the person who feels bad about their stash. Maybe it's just me and they're not telling me the truth. But
well, see, that's very, very interesting. And I think that's the subject for maybe the next call. I think it's really delicate. So I just want people to talk about it. And maybe you hear someone say one little thing that gives you a paradigm shift into, well, gee, maybe if I tabulated what I had, I would.
Maybe if the yarn was all in one place and I could see it physically, then maybe I would.
But see, that's the kind of thing.
But
like
because
maybe
it's
that's
there and everywhere and in cupboards.
But maybe that's the
storage, I
suggestion.
can't see it all exactly. You've got to
Maybe
get
that's the suggestion. Have it in one place where you
Yeah.
see it, and maybe for one person, maybe that's going to make all the difference.
Well,
Okay,
will
I got to get to the Tribeca Film Festival because my
Okay.
friend's son directed his first film. So if you have a
Oh,
chance to see
cool.
Alden
Nice.
Ehrenreich's short film, I don't know if it's ever going to be in the theaters, but it's in my neighborhood. I got to go. I'll see you in a month.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, you
Likewise.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.